You're fast, little one. But speed is nothing without loyalty. You have exactly 48 hours to find my ledger, or you go back to washing dishes, or worse. Any sensible person would have felt the blood drain from their face. Any civilian would have crumpled, begged for mercy, or run straight for the door. But standing there, facing Julian Carver's smug, entitled smirk, all I saw was a wide-open opportunity. He saw an insignificant waitress who could be broken. He was wrong. I wasn't serving him. I was watching him. I was cataloging his weaknesses, recording his casual cruelty, and waiting for the one chance he'd be stupid enough to give me. They say justice is blind. I'm living proof that sometimes justice needs a little help. Sometimes it needs a burner phone, a tactical vest hidden under a polyester uniform, and a detective willing to risk everything. My name is Detective Tiana Wells, and this is the story of how I went from serving expensive scotch to becoming the one thing a mafia boss never saw coming: The Wire. Before we get deep into this story, please subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss any of our tales of love and danger. I would also love to know where you are listening from tonight. Drop a comment below and let me know your city or country. Your engagement means everything to us. And your likes really help us bring you more captivating stories like this one. Now, let's continue. I took the job at Carver's high-end restaurant 3 years ago, not for the money, but for the location. It was the perfect front. I needed to be close, to be a ghost in the machine, slowly piecing together the evidence that would finally bring down the Carver organization. I learned the menu, the wine list, and the priceless art of being invisible. I was told the rules on my first day: never speak unless spoken to. Never acknowledge the guest's business. Never, under any circumstance, make eye contact with Julian Carver. The cost of a single mistake wasn't a lost tip, it was a lost life. I accepted the risks, but I never anticipated the slow, grating humiliation of a man who believed the color of my uniform and my skin made me subservient. It was a Tuesday, not a Saturday. We had a crisis at a VIP table. A diplomat's wife had a medical emergency. I stepped in without thinking. I cleared the room, called the EMTs, and managed the situation with the surgical precision of a trained officer, all without raising my voice. Julian, watching from his private balcony, saw the performance. Later, he pulled me into his back office. Instead of a reward, he simply laughed. He leaned in, his breath reeking of the expensive whiskey I'd just poured. "You're good, Tiana. Truly efficient. Almost like you've been trained for real crises." He let his eyes rake over my face, the smirk widening. "But you're just the maid, aren't you? Remember your place. Go get me that ledger from the Russians' safe house. Fail, and you'll know what it means to truly lose your place." He expected fear. He expected me to run. I looked him dead in the eye, and for the first time, he saw not a servant, but a detective ready for the fight. "Consider it done, Mr. Carver." 3 years. 3 years of polyester, cheap non-slip shoes, and the endless, grating smell of lemon polish. The uniform was the perfect disguise: baggy, asexual, and instantly forgettable. It was designed to tell the world, I am a service provider. I am nobody. And in the world of Julian Carver, where every face was a brand and every suit cost more than Tiana's annual salary, Invisibility was armor. Tiana Wells, NYPD detective, had perfected the art of meekness. Her walk was deferential, her eyes lowered, meeting a customer's gaze only long enough to confirm an order, never long enough to invite a conversation. She moved like a phantom through the dining room of Carver's, a place that served as a legitimate front for money laundering and high-stakes planning. She knew the layout better than the architects who designed it. The blind spots in the surveillance system, the exact weight of the silent, double-locking door to the back office, the pattern of the night guard's cigarette break. Her internal world, however, was a constant, screaming counterpoint to her quiet exterior. Inside the meek Waitress lived a woman who excelled in tactical training, who could dismantle a Sig Sauer P320 blindfolded, and whose professional goal was to place Julian Carver behind bars for the rest of his miserable life. The cost of this duality was heavy. Her handler, Agent Reyes, was the only person who knew she was alive, and communication was limited to coded, one-word messages hidden in takeout orders. She had zero margin for error. One slip, one moment of speaking like a cop instead of a college dropout, and her cover wouldn't just be blown, it would be permanently ended. The hardest part wasn't the danger, it was the waiting. Every shift was a slow burn of frustration. She spent her days watching smug, entitled men sign away fortunes on cocktail napkins, secure in the knowledge that they were above the law. She watched Julian Carver glide through the room, accepting adoration and deference as his birthright, occasionally pausing to treat Tiana and her colleagues like dirty, necessary furniture. She felt the cold isolation burrowing deep, threatening to replace her true self. Her identity, honed by years of police work and a sense of fierce, inherited pride, was slowly eroding under the constant weight of the uniform and the persona. But she held firm, because every time she was called sweetheart or told to hurry up, girl, it wasn't a slight against Tiana the Waitress. It was ammunition for Detective Wells. Every instance of disrespect was a reminder that Julian Carver was a bully who needed to be put down. And she had taken this job, suffered this isolation, and swallowed this humiliation to be the one who finally did it. The operation was slow, excruciatingly slow, but she was close. She was just waiting for the last critical piece of evidence to fall into place. She just didn't know yet that the final piece would be thrust into her unwilling hands. The tension had been building for 3 years, slow and steady like tectonic plates grinding beneath the earth. It needed a catalyst, and that catalyst arrived on a humid Tuesday night, wearing a $1,000 suit and carrying a bottle of vintage Bordeaux. The guest was Senator Davies. A powerful politician, Julian Carver, was trying desperately to keep indebted and quiet. The disaster wasn't a wine spill, it was worse. It started with a careless elbow and ended with a towering 7-foot ice sculpture, a pointless display of opulence, crashing down onto the private dining area, narrowly missing the senator's head and soaking the entire table in melted water and shards of ice. Waiters froze. Julian's lieutenant, Tony, started shouting. The whole room threatened to devolve into a scene that would certainly make the papers, potentially damaging Carver's meticulously crafted aura of untouchable class. But Tiana didn't freeze. Detective Wells, trained for immediate crisis response, took over. Her feet moved before her mind registered the command. Ignoring the chaos, she moved directly to the senator, not to clean, But to mitigate, she used the large service card as a temporary shield, quietly ushering the guest toward the exit while speaking in a calm, authoritative voice the waitress persona had never used. She directed two terrified busboys to clear the glass silently and had fresh linens covering the soaked floor within 90 seconds. By the time Julian Carver descended from his private balcony, his face a mask of cold fury, the disaster was gone. The senator was safely outside, and the table looked like a clean, if slightly damp, crime scene ready for reset. Tiana, back in her role, was already wiping the floor, silent and invisible. Later, Julian summoned her to the back office. It was a space designed for intimidation. Dark wood, heavy velvet, and a single merciless spotlight aimed at the center of the rug where she was told to stand. He didn't thank her. He simply watched her for a full minute, hands clasped behind his back, a slow, predatory grin forming. "You're something, Tiana," he said, his voice soft, almost conversational, making it far more menacing than a shout. "A little machine. Efficient, quiet, doesn't panic. Most people of your background, they fall apart when things get loud. They cry, they yell, they make things messy." He paused, circling her slowly, like a lion assessing an animal in a tiny cage. "But you just cleaned up the mess." He stopped directly in front of her. "I'm told your family came over from the islands." "Yes? Your mother cleans houses for the wealthy uptown." "It wasn't a question. You exchanged one service uniform for another. I admire consistency." He reached out, his long fingers tipping her chin up, so she was forced to meet his gaze. His eyes were cold, assessing, and utterly dismissive. "You saved me a serious inconvenience tonight. A good dog gets a treat, Tiana, but a good dog also needs to be reminded who holds the leash." He removed his hand. "Smile for me, Tiana. Smile like you mean it. Let me see the gratitude for a job well done." That was the breaking point. Not the danger, not the isolation, but the public, arrogant mockery of her entire existence. Her race, her family, her intelligence reduced to the obedience of an animal. She didn't smile. The mask remained frozen, but inside, Detective Wells made a silent, irreversible commitment. "He just gave me the opening." Julian, finally irritated by her lack of response, sighed, pulling a remote from his pocket and flicking on a television screen, revealing a grainy image of an old, locked vault. "Fine. No smile. Let's test that efficiency. You need a purpose beyond scrubbing floors, and I have a problem. A very important ledger was stolen. I need you to retrieve it from a safe house in Red Hook. It's fortified, Tiana. It's impossible. Failure means the dog gets put down. Success," he finished, his eyes burning with a sudden, wary curiosity, "means you might be worth keeping around." Julian's words hung in the oppressive silence of the office, heavier than the velvet drapes. Fortified. Impossible. Failure means the dog gets put down. The threat was delivered with the casualness of ordering coffee, yet Tiana felt a cold jolt run through her. This wasn't a punishment for the near disaster. It was a psychological test. He wasn't testing her loyalty, which he assumed was non-existent. He was testing her nerve, trying to see if that machine-like efficiency he'd just witnessed was truly cold or just a carefully constructed facade waiting to shatter. Red Hook, she finally managed, the single word cutting through the tension. Her voice was flat, deliberately devoid of the fear she should have been radiating. Show no weakness. Just absorb the data. Julian leaned back against his desk, crossing his arms over his chest. His expression had shifted from cold fury to genuine, clinical interest, the look of a scientist observing a rare specimen. They're called the vultures. Amateurish, but persistent. They took my ledger to a safe house 2 blocks from the water. They think they're clever with the locks, the cameras, the single entry point. He gestured vaguely toward the grainy vault image on the screen. I could send Tony and his goons. They'd turn it into a bloodbath, retrieve the ledger, and attract too much noise. But you, he trailed off, a slow, speculative smile spreading. You go unnoticed, Tiana. You're an illusion of subservience. I want to see if that illusion can cut through steel. He was giving her a direct line into the heart of his operations, not as a reward, but as a highly probable suicide run. He needed the ledger and saw her as a disposable tool, a plausible scapegoat who would either retrieve the item or simply disappear, leaving no traceable connection to him. He expected her to refuse, to panic, or to simply fail the moment she had to apply her mysterious efficiency to a matter of life and death. This was it. This was the moment she'd sacrificed 3 years for. The slow, grinding surveillance had provided everything except the final damning evidence, the encrypted contents of that very ledger. If she could retrieve it, she wouldn't just be proving herself to a criminal. She would be obtaining the key to the entire operation. It was a tactical gift. The risk was monumental. She would be operating far outside the tight safety net of the restaurant, without backup, deep in rival territory. But the reward was the successful conclusion of Operation Ledger Drop. Tiana straightened her shoulders, pushing down the instinct to explain her plan, to detail the immense dangers of the Red Hook location. That would only validate his assessment of her as a nervous subordinate. Instead, she let the silence stretch, absorbing the coordinates, memorizing the brief details he had carelessly given her. "And if I succeed, Mr. Carver?" she asked, her eyes steady, meeting his challenge directly. Julian chuckled, a low, satisfied sound that held a tinge of confusion. "Then, Tiana, you stop pouring wine and you start counting money. You prove you're more than just a maid. You prove you're truly useful." 48 hours, she confirmed, the words crisp and measured. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, not of obedience, but of cold professional acceptance. She was no longer just the waitress. She was the detective, and Julian Carver had just unwittingly signed off on the final, most dangerous play. She turned and walked out, leaving the heat and oppressive wealth of the office for the cold necessity of the streets, her heart finally beating the frantic rhythm of an agent back in the field. The second Tiana stepped out of Julian's office and the heavy mahogany door clicked shut behind her, the waitress uniform felt like a costume suffocating a trained professional. The terror she should have felt was completely eclipsed by the cold, exhilarating precision of the plan already forming in her mind. 48 hours. That was less than 2 full days to execute a tactical infiltration that should have taken the entire organized crime division weeks to plan. She completed her shift on autopilot, clearing tables, pouring water, and smiling the empty, practiced smile of a servant. Carver was not around, having dismissed her immediately after issuing the challenge, but his lieutenant, Tony, kept a careful eye on her, waiting for the moment she'd break or flee. She ignored him completely. By 2 a.m., the restaurant was empty, and Tiana, clocking out, walked past the dumpsters and into the shadows of the alley she used every night. The code word wasn't a whisper into a hidden mic. It was simpler, hidden in plain sight. At the corner bodega, she bought a pack of cheap generic cigarettes and paid in exact change, a single crumpled $5 bill. "Any news from Agent Reyes?" she asked the night cashier, a tired, kindly man named Miguel. "Reyes?" He said, "Tell you his garden is finally growing some nightshade this year." Miguel replied, not looking up from his crossword puzzle. Nightshade, the code word. It meant operation tempo accelerated to high risk. Needs immediate tactical access. Tiana was supposed to go home, rest, and then start planning. Instead, she took the subway 3 stops deeper into Brooklyn and emerged in a warehouse district, heading toward a rusted, anonymous storage unit she hadn't visited in nearly a year. This was her personal, unauthorized police cache, established during the long months of surveillance, a bunker hidden in plain sight, paid for entirely with her own savings, ensuring no official police paper trail could lead back to her if Julian discovered her identity. Once the heavy door was secured, Tiana shed the polyester uniform like a second skin, dropping the meek waitress onto the dusty floor. It was replaced by a shift in posture, the straight spine of a cop, the coiled tension of an athlete. She spent the next day transforming. Out came the lock-picking set, a custom kit with tools fine enough to pick a bank vault. Out came the non-traceable comms, a small encrypted radio Reyes would monitor once she entered the hot zone. And finally, the Glock 26. She cleaned and checked the compact 9mm, the weight of the familiar weapon feeling like a comforting anchor after 3 years of empty hands. Her police training wasn't just physical, it was mental. She meticulously reviewed maps of the Red Hook waterfront, visualizing sight lines, escape routes, and potential weak points in the Vulture's perimeter. She used the limited details Julian had provided, 2 blocks from the water, single entry point, to build a comprehensive, 3-dimensional mental model of the safe house. Every movement was crisp, efficient, and lethal. The tedious, frustrating waiting game was over. Tiana Wells, the detective, had been given a mission, and the woman who walked out of that storage unit, dressed in dark, functional gear, was fully divorced from the woman who served Julian Carver his dinner. She was focused, she was prepared, and she was ready to use the arrogance of the Mafia boss as the precise tool for his own undoing. The next 24 hours were a zero-sum game of calculated risk. She had briefed Agent Reyes, who was furious she was going in alone on an unapproved action, but who understood the gravity of the opportunity. Now, having secured her gear and run through every possible scenario in the Vulture's safe house, Tiana was left only with the silence and the clock. She was in a cheap, rented room near the warehouse district, the kind of place with perpetually thin walls and a mattress that smelled faintly of mildew. It was here, stripped of the uniform and the armor of her planning, that Detective Wells was briefly overtaken by Tiana Wells, the woman. She sat on the edge of the bed, the Glock disassembled on the bedside table, and let the sheer, raw terror of the mission wash over her. This wasn't a standard collar. This was a black operation, unauthorized and unwitnessed. If she was caught, the NYPD would deny all knowledge and her life would end as collateral damage in a gang feud. There would be no heroes, no medal, just a small headline about a waitress who got involved with the wrong people. The emotional cost of 3 years of isolation, the missed birthdays, the family events she couldn't attend, the fear of losing herself entirely in the meek persona crashed into her. She closed her eyes, trying to conjure the faces of her nieces, trying to remember the sound of her mother's laugh, using them as emotional ballast against the sinking weight of loneliness. The mission wasn't just about taking down Julian Carver. It was about honoring the sacrifices she'd made, proving that the risk was worth the price. Just as the doubts started to feel dangerously heavy, the thin walls delivered an unexpected reminder of the other world. A soft, hesitant knock came on the door. Tiana immediately scooped the gun parts into a duffel bag, her heart hammering. She opened the door a crack. Standing in the hallway was Miguel, the night cashier from the bodega, holding a plastic bag containing a styrofoam container. "I know you were supposed to get the nightshade from Reyes," he whispered, his eyes wide and nervous. "But I saw you today. You look different. Too quiet. You looked like you were going to war." He pushed the container forward. "This is Arroz con pollo. My wife made extra. You shouldn't go to war on an empty stomach. You need strength for the night." It was the briefest, most genuine moment of human connection she'd had in months. Miguel wasn't a handler or an enemy. He was just a decent person who saw a flicker of the truth behind the mask and offered kindness. He saw her not as the waitress or the cop, but as a person in need. "Thank you, Miguel," she managed, her voice thick. "I needed this." He nodded, already backing away, his face pale with worry. "Be safe, Tiana." As she ate the warm, familiar meal, the paralyzing fear receded, replaced by a renewed, cold clarity. Miguel's genuine concern, the brief, empathetic connection, solidified her resolve. Julian Carver operated on the principle that every human transaction was transactional, a power play, a debt, a means to an end. He treated people like things to be used and discarded. His destruction wasn't just a professional necessity, it was an emotional one. For Miguel, for her family, and for every person Julian Carver had ever stepped on, Tiana Wells was going to ensure that arrogance finally came with a price tag. The clock was ticking, and the dark hours were over. It was time for the infiltration. The Red Hook warehouse district slept under a blanket of cold, industrial fog. The Vulture safe house was exactly as Julian had described, a squat, concrete block with minimal external lighting, making the single entry point a natural funnel for security. Tiana moved in the dead of night, dressed in layered black tactical gear that swallowed light, moving from shadow to shadow with the effortless glide of a hunter. She was no longer a waitress. She was an echo. She approached the perimeter slowly, using the damp sea air to mask the faint sound of her movements. The first layer of defense was standard issue, a perimeter fence with motion-activated sensors. Instead of trying to bypass the sensors, a riskier move, she accessed the external junction box, a rusty relic she'd pinpointed on her map. Working quickly, she used a custom low-resistance shunt to reroute the circuit, temporarily blinding the alarm system on the fence line without tripping the main power indicator inside. It was textbook police technical training, not brute force. The cameras were the next obstacle. 3 of them were positioned for overlapping coverage on the main door. Julian hadn't accounted for her knowledge of cheap, repurposed industrial surveillance. Tiana slid into a narrow space between 2 massive parked shipping containers, pulled out a small, specialized laser pointer, and, with military precision, held the beam on the lens of the heist camera. The sudden, intense light overloaded the sensor for the 2 seconds needed for her to reach the main door. The lock was a formidable, complex deadbolt system. Tiana knelt, pulled out her lockpicking kit, and settled into the task. The rhythmic clicking of the tumblers was the only sound, a metallic whisper in the vast silence of the docks. Her breathing was deep and even, a meditation learned in the Academy's stress training. Julian had expected her to blast her way in or fail miserably. He hadn't accounted for the fact that a cop trained in burglary investigation knows more about getting through doors than any street thug. After what felt like an eternity, but was only 90 seconds, the last tumbler clicked home. The heavy door swung inward just enough for her to slip through, sealing the light and the silence behind her. Inside, the layout was open warehouse space, dimly lit by hanging work lamps. The air smelled of stale cigarettes and cheap lubricant. Her training immediately pinpointed the weakest link, a lone guard dozing at a fold-out table near the back, slumped over a comic book. Tiana moved toward him, using the massive shipping crates for cover. Her feet made no sound on the concrete floor. She knew she couldn't afford a struggle, nor could she use the Glock. The sound would summon the remaining vultures from deeper within the building. It had to be fast, silent, and clean. She closed the distance, her movements a fluid, economic blur of CQC, close quarters combat. She applied a rapid, focused strike to the carotid artery, followed instantly by a maneuver that dropped the guard to the floor without a sound, neutralizing him instantly and painlessly. She secured his weapon and checked his pulse. He was breathing, but unconscious and out of the fight. The path to the vault, located behind a stack of empty barrels, was clear. Tiana pressed the button on her encrypted radio. In and secure, she whispered, her voice tight but steady. Reyes's acknowledgement was a single, reassuring burst of static. The waitress was gone. Detective Wells was now standing before the prize. The vault, hidden behind the haphazard stack of oil drums, was less intimidating than the deadbolt Tiana had just bypassed. It was a cheap, fireproof safe bolted crudely to the concrete floor, confirmation that Julian's assessment of the vultures as amateurish was accurate. She set down her bag, opened her lockpicking kit again, and began the delicate process. The mechanism gave way quickly, clicking open with a soft, final sigh. Inside, nestled amongst useless cash and cheap weapons, was the ledger, a heavy black external hard drive, encrypted and password protected. She secured it inside a waterproof pouch and tucked it deep into her pack, the satisfying weight confirming the success of the mission's first critical phase. In and secure, she whispered the updated status into her comms. She was securing the safe door when the silence fractured. It wasn't an alarm, but the sound of an internal door creaking open, followed by a sudden, harsh whistle. Someone had found the unconscious guard, or worse, discovered the bypassed external junction box. Tiana didn't pause for thought. She reacted. She sprinted away from the vault, utilizing the precise map she'd built in her head. The main exit was now impossible. The noise was coming from that direction. She veered toward the eastern wall, which, according to her intel, housed an old industrial loading bay door. 3 men, bulky, poorly trained, and moving with panic, rounded a corner of crates, shouting in slurred Italian. They hadn't seen her yet, only the open safe. Tiana saw the opportunity. Using a low center of gravity, she kicked the bottom crate of a stacked pallet of ceramic tiles. The entire stack roared, tipping over and creating a massive, noisy barrier between herself and the pursuing vultures. The momentary chaos gave her the opening she needed. One of the men, foolishly trying to climb over the fallen crates, was struck by Tiana's baton, a swift, efficient blow to the solar plexus. He collapsed, clutching his stomach, momentarily neutralizing the threat. She focused on the 2 remaining, who were now flanking the mess, spreading out to corner her. This wasn't graceful combat. It was a desperate, high-stakes scramble. She used a heavy, rusted pipe she'd spotted hours ago during her mental walkthrough, not as a weapon, but as a lever, jamming it under the ancient loading door handle. As the 2 men closed in, Tiana released the door's latch, and the heavy metal door shuddered upward, bathing the room in moonlight and cold harbor fog. The men stopped, momentarily blinded by the sudden light. Tiana seized the microsecond, delivering a fast combination of blocks and strikes, a wrist lock to the closest man, followed by a sharp elbow that sent the second staggering back. She didn't wait for them to recover. She dove under the rising door and rolled onto the unforgiving asphalt of the loading dock. Gunshots barked in the night, the projectiles whining off the metal frame of the loading door, kicking up sparks where she'd been seconds before. Tiana was running low, pumping her legs hard, disappearing into the cover of the dense maritime fog. She heard frustrated shouts, but they were already fading behind her. She had the ledger, she had escaped, and Julian Carver's impossible task was complete. She had just gone toe-to-toe with his rivals and walked away unscathed, physically proving she was far more dangerous than he could ever imagine. Tiana didn't wait until the next day. The clock was still ticking, but she knew the timing of her return was as crucial as the infiltration itself. She shed the majority of her tactical gear in a public storage locker miles away, retaining only the encrypted ledger and the waterproof pouch. She returned to the restaurant 4 hours after her escape, just as the early morning cleaning crew was polishing the marble floors. She didn't use the staff entrance. She strode directly through the front door, still wearing the dark, utilitarian clothes, a stark contrast to the elegant setting. Her clothes were torn at the knee, her jacket was ripped at the shoulder from the quick scramble under the loading door, and a thin, dark line of dried blood from a superficial cut on her cheek testified to the struggle. She walked past the stunned night manager, who tried to stop her, but Tiana's eyes were focused straight ahead, carrying the cold, untouchable authority of someone who had just looked death in the face and won. Julian Carver was where she expected him to be, in his office, reviewing reports and sipping a glass of rare amber liquid. He looked up, his expression shifting through disbelief, annoyance, and finally, a slow, predatory calculation. He had clearly expected her to be gone or dead. Tiana, he murmured, setting his glass down with unnecessary precision. You're late, and you look like you crawled out of a sewer. I believe I asked for loyalty, not a display of poor hygiene. She stopped 3 feet from his desk. Her breathing was steady, the fatigue masked by pure adrenaline. She didn't speak. She reached into her pack, pulled out the heavy black hard drive, the ledger, and hurled it onto his polished mahogany desk. It landed with a loud, satisfying thud that made Julian flinch. The ledger, she stated, her voice husky from the harbor air, but strong and unwavering. Retrieved from the Vulture's safe house in Red Hook. Mission complete, Mr. Carver. 38 hours ahead of your schedule. The silence that followed was absolute. Julian didn't look at the drive. He looked only at her face, reading the cold, disciplined brutality in her eyes. He saw the precise, efficient violence required to not only break into a guarded location, but to fight her way out. He was a man who understood the language of power, and Tiana was speaking it fluently. He was stunned not by the recovery of the item, but by the physical proof of her sheer competence, a skill level that went far beyond cleaning up spilled ice sculptures. Julian rose slowly, circling his desk until he was inches from her. He reached out, not to intimidate, but to touch the dried blood on her cheek. Tiana didn't recoil. The vultures were supposed to break you, he whispered, a strange mix of admiration and apprehension in his tone. They were supposed to make an example of you. You neutralized 3 armed men and made an escape through a fortified position. He smiled then, and for the first time, it wasn't smug, it was genuinely dangerous. You aren't a maid, Tiana. You're a weapon. And I wasted 3 years putting you on table 7. He backed away, waving a dismissive hand at her torn clothes. You need a cleanup. From this moment forward, you will be my personal executive assistant. You have access to every communication that passes through this office, every file I touch, and every meeting I take. I want you to understand my world, Tiana, because you've proven you have the teeth to survive it. Go shower and get yourself a decent suit. You start in 1 hour. The mask of the waitress was shattered, replaced by the facade of the trusted, lethal operative. Tiana gave a single nod. The assignment was over, but the mission had just begun. Julian Carver had promoted the enemy into his inner circle, granting her direct access to the final piece of evidence she needed, his encrypted communications. The transformation was complete, but the job was not. The expensive suit Julian had insisted upon felt like a better uniform than the polyester apron, offering not invisibility, but unimpeachable access. For 3 days, Tiana lived as Julian's shadow, attending every meeting, handling every encrypted communication, and witnessing the casual brutality of his entire empire laid bare. He saw her as his efficient, lethal extension. She saw him as the final, complete piece of evidence. The recovered ledger, the black hard drive, lay locked in her secure location, still encrypted. The final piece of the puzzle, the digital key, was housed not in a safe, but in the labyrinthine cloud storage connected to Julian's personal terminal. Her proximity, her promoted status, was the only thing that could bridge that gap. Julian had foolishly trusted his arrogance over his paranoia. The moment came late on the 3rd night. Julian was engaged in a lengthy, distracted conference call with associates in Europe, his back momentarily turned toward the office's main workstation. Tiana moved with the silent, efficient speed that had earned her this promotion. She executed a rapid sequence of commands, a keystroke injection she'd planned meticulously for months, and initiated the data transfer. It took 7 agonizing seconds. The digital key, the link that would crack the ledger and tie every communication directly to Julian Carver, was now hers. The operation was officially terminated. She had everything. Tiana stepped into the private bathroom adjoining the office, her heart hammering a victory drum against her ribs. She located the prearranged signal device, a simple magnetic contact, and secured it beneath the marble sink. A quick, affirmative tap. The eagle has landed. The response was immediate and silent. A slight, high-frequency vibration through the floor, confirmation that the NYPD strike team and the FBI were already mobilizing outside the restaurant perimeter. The countdown had begun. She walked back into the office, standing before Julian, who was still talking, still smiling, completely unaware of the net closing around him. This was the end of the line. Tiana reached up, her fingers tracing the line of the expensive blazer she was wearing. She tore it open, pulling aside the silk lining to expose the small, military-grade wire and transmitter taped beneath her shirt. The contact mic, which had recorded every mocking word, every criminal order, was suddenly visible. Julian's eyes, so sharp, so calculating, followed her movement. The smile froze, replaced by a confusion that rapidly curdled into blinding, absolute fury as he understood the impossible truth. He started to rise, his mouth opening to shout. Tiana Wells didn't raise her weapon. She didn't have to. She met his gaze, the meekness, the subservience, the apathy, all of it utterly gone, replaced by the unflinching, cold authority of the law. Detective Wells, NYPD, she stated, her voice clear, hard, and amplified by the hidden microphone. You're under arrest, Mr. Carver. And for the record, she paused, watching the sudden, devastating realization shatter his arrogant control. I was never just the waitress. The outer doors of the office suite burst open just as she finished speaking, flooding the room with the sight of armed, uniformed officers. The transformation was complete. The invisible servant had become the powerful agent of justice, successfully fulfilling the mission Julian Carver himself had assigned to her.